Sorry, false start. Okay, so I wanted to start with a question, why tell your story? Because that kind of brackets everything else that we're going to do. So the first thing I wanted us to think through is that we are really trying to gain an understanding. So telling our story isn't really about publishing our story. It's not really about communicating with others. The first step is really gaining a deeper understanding for ourselves. And I think that most people are not really aware of how unique their lives are. We tend to view everyone else as being just like us. But what I find is that people are kind of amazingly unique. And writing forces us to just think through a deeper understanding of who we are and how we function in the world, what our purpose is. And another thing about being human is that we tend to be driven by our emotions, and our emotions, kind of come and go with whatever is happening to us at the time. And so writing our story actually puts some objectivity into the whole mix. And so that's kind of an important thing. Second thing is when we write our story, it forces us to deal with some kind of level of accountability, because as soon as you say, my story is this, my experience is this, then immediately, even in your own mind, you're challenged about, are you really being honest with yourself? Are you really documenting things the way they really are? And so I think stories can be really important for doing that. And it's also a great way to start conversations with friends and family, and to really promote those personal connections. Writing a story is a great way to really build your relationships as you begin dialoguing with people that you care about. And it's a great way to celebrate your life, because I think a lot of us just go from day to day, just blazing through the events of life, and we don't really take enough opportunity to celebrate what's happening, and to figure out what the things that we have tried to do that have been successful. Then those are definitely worth celebrating. I think the feedback that we get from sharing our story is really valuable for input. There are people that know us really well, and we want to listen to their viewpoint, and we really want to gain insight by putting our story on paper and then getting response from other people. And then ultimately, this whole process is going to build trust, and it's going to deepen our connections with people. You want to be careful in this context, because there are some people that you probably don't want to share your story with, because it will empower them to inflict harm on you. And that falls into the pearls before swine kind of thing. You want to be careful about sharing your story with trustworthy people that are not going to abuse that. And then ultimately, it's stories that connect people. So as we gain understanding and we begin to dialogue in the context of a story, it really causes us to come together. So at that point, I'm going to turn it over to people. What triggered in your mind?
I was bummed that a neighbor just came and knocked on my door right in the middle of that good stuff. I'm sorry, but I will say that I appreciated when you said disclosure builds trust, but be careful, because that's a big deal for me. I'm going to pass on the talking point to someone else now.
I'm willing to jump in. So, Mark, if nobody else is gonna
Yeah,
speak,
go.
I can. Okay. The reason this meetup group kind of reached out and touched me was that when I taught this course at the Osher Institute last fall, it was kind of like my personal story of explaining as to how we got to where we are. But it's a huge topic. I mean, it's like addressing the entire history, story of history, because what I was addressing was ideas that had been suggested to me in other books that I've read, was that in prehistory, women shared more equally in status and power in old Europe and Middle Eastern Europe, which was the extent of her her research. This is Rianne Eisler, who wrote a book called Chalice and the Blade, published in 1988. And she's still alive and still very active. But that book, which I read around 2008, pretty much turned me into a feminist. I mean, I'd always respected feminism. I was sort of a product of the 1960s and 70s and thought, well, yeah, feminism is a good idea. I mean, women deserve to be equal and all that. But I had no idea of the historical background of it. And her book, The Chalice, the Blade, is a story of male and female energy throughout recorded history. Because her book actually starts in prehistory. Because history only started when languages started, which was around 5,000 BC or so. And it really just opened up my mind as to how deeply our civilizations have been misdeveloping, so to speak, along the lines of empires, and empires have always been dominated by patriarchy. And so now, also what opened up what touched me about this meetup group, because you announced it just during this time that this incredible, eruption of Black Lives Matter, and also not too long ago, the how women have been speaking out much more broadly, how they've been abused, the Me Too stories. So all of this kind of is coming to a head, which all fed into the course that I was starting to teach at the Osher Institute last fall, and which I hope to continue to teach this fall. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from other people what they're experiencing in these times, and how incredibly profound the changes that we're trying to force ourselves through in a very short period of time, based on all these fallacies and, frankly, lies that we've been telling each other about our history in the past. And so a big part of what we need to go through to make progress into the future is to confront our past, our histories. And a lot of that has to do with our colonial empires, and how much America currently is still much an example. It's sort of a projection from past thinking about empires, and thus the the emphasis on being militarily strong and all that.
Rick,
But
you actually did remind me of something. The original question, why to tell stories, and kind of the history of storytelling is, my wife is a writer of fiction, and the way she explains it is that it's our way of emotionally processing things that didn't happen to us. And so it's kind of a way of gaining wisdom without actually having all of the suffering of everyone's lives actually happen to us. And so maybe in that regard, if we have had a lot of suffering in our lives, we can benefit other people by sharing that story in such a way that they can process it and walk away with some of the wisdom, so that they can avoid it. So in that regard, even mistakes are maybe even more valuable than successes.
Yeah, I hope it's a huge learning process for all of us. And I don't mean to hog the stage here any longer than I need to, but I just wanted to say that I think there's a huge opportunity for us to learn from each other in this time, and to learn to retell our stories in a way that we come to understand them. Because I think I went through a lot of certain amount of internal emotional pain trying to understand myself as a white privileged male coming out of the South, because I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and learning about all these stories about people that I can see why it happened, and so now I'm trying to learn how to compress that narrative into a shorter course I would like to teach and communicate to other people. So I'm going to leave it there for myself.
Yeah, that's really good. And that really leads us into our kind of next segment. And it's, if you're going to tell your story, the biggest question that you have to grapple with is who really are you? What is, when you peel all the layers back and you look in and figure out what motivates you at the core level, and you're touching on many of these issues, Rick. And the first thing I think that you have to grapple with is just how unique different people are. And each person is completely unique, has unique strengths and weaknesses, has a unique personality type. There are multiple models that try to help us understand what those personality types are like. Then there's social interaction styles, and then there's belief systems that are heavily influenced by the world that we grew up in and the opportunities that we've had. So in one sense, we're completely unique. In another sense, we're just like everyone else. We all are shaped by our basic human needs. We're all basically the center of our own world. And we, look at the world and want to try to conform everything to circumstances that are good for ourselves. And that's kind of at the heart of all the prejudice and imperialism that you were talking about. And all of these bad things really come down to just this issue of selfishness, of trying to shape the world in a way that we benefit. And if we have to do that at the expense of everyone else, then that's kind of how we end up being. So the biggest issue for me with the who am I is really not even who am I right now, but who am I becoming? In what way am I growing, and what am I turning into, and do I like that? Or do I need to take a different path to, try to become, something else and get past those limitations? And I just want to throw out this as an idea, and that is that our personality ends up determining what we value. And we are all, born with some kind of a personality. And then the values are really shaped based on who we actually are at the very core. And then we adopt beliefs that are consistent with those values. And so there's sort of a progression here that is important to think through, in particular in your own life, especially if you find yourself in situations where you have frequent value conflicts with organizations that you're a part of or people that you interact with. I think it's important to understand how all of those pieces fit together. And so I want to ask that then as an open-ended question: who are you, if anyone wants to share?
This is Lori. I just wanted to, I do the genealogy for our family, and one side of our family, they did a really good job of writing down first-person accounts and journaled, and they told their story well, but it was from their perspective. And then the other side of my family really didn't write anything down, so it becomes somebody else telling their story. And what I told my mom, because I've been trying to get my mom to kind of write down her life, at least a little bit of it, What I told her is if she doesn't do that, then it's up to me to write her life. And it's only from my perspective, and it won't be the right perspective because it's not hers and it's her life. So I think that's why it's important to write your story, is because the only person who really knows your story is you. And if you don't do that, then you leave it up to others to interpret who you were.
Yeah, that's good. Anyone else?
Lori,
Oh, go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say, Lori, but isn't really our value what we leave with others as we go through life? So to some degree,
I think so.
what they tell of us.
I do think.
Go ahead.
I do think so, but I think that that's part of our story then. So they, because of how they lived or what they lived, like for example, my grandfather, he had a whole family before my grandmother and our family, and they all died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but he never talked about it. And he was a very distant man. He wasn't like your typical grandfather who was really loving and wanted to be around everybody. And I never got that. And I didn't know about that other family. I also didn't know about his family history with drug and alcohol addiction for his father. So once you peel back those layers, you understand the person more. But he needed to tell his story in order for me to better understand who he is and how that has affected me in my life or my mom in her life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
One aspect of,
I think April was going to say something.
oh, I'm sorry.
Hit that button, April.
So I would like to add a piece into your 3-piece chart that you had, where you had personality, values, and beliefs. I would like to add habits, because I personally, I've been doing a habit study for the last year. I've been reading as many books on habits that I can get a hold of. And I've discovered that it's in those daily minute decisions that those end up shaping our personality, which ends up shaping our values, which ends up shaping our beliefs.
Yeah.
So when I make the choice to read a book instead of mindlessly scroll on my phone, or when I make the choice to go for a walk and spend time in prayer and get myself centered versus doing so many other tasks that are just going to sit and wait for me anyways, then that shapes who I am at my personality, which also shapes my values, not only that I'm showing my kids and the people who are around me, but also like as I move forward into the day or into the next day, or as I make decisions, it changes. It's like a spiral effect, like it's a downstream situation, you know? And so I personally discovered that those tiny habits, what you decide to do in the next 15 minutes or the next hour or right before bed or right when you wake up in the morning, that's really what can shape your entire week. And then from that, it shapes your entire month, you know, like, so.
Yeah, that's good.
That was my 2 cents.
So I want us to spend a few minutes just thinking about the drama in our lives, thinking about the action. What's the plot line in our lives, and how does that influence how we want to tell our story? So my belief, and I've been testing this out for the last several years as I've been interacting with people, is that my belief is that everyone has one central struggle. And that's something that they contend with all their lives. And if they can win that one struggle, then everything else falls in place. But if they lose that one struggle, they lose everything. And for each person, it's something different. But we all have this belief, and again, this is what I've been testing out with people. We all have this belief that because my struggle isn't your struggle, that my life must be easy, and that everyone else around you has an easy life because they don't have your core issue that they're dealing with. And so I want to introduce this idea that that comparison really creates a whole false reality for us, and that until we can grapple with what is our unique struggle and really put it in those terms, then it's difficult for us to overcome that struggle. And that's actually probably the most interesting part about your story. If you have some central struggle in your life and your story is just about facts and I went here and did this, and that's not like a very interesting story. And so the thing that makes people interesting is overcoming challenges and pain. So leaning into that and figuring out, how do I overcome difficulties in my life? That's probably one of the best things that you can share. And the other thing that's useful to point out is that your central struggle is probably also tied to your central strength. That whatever makes you strong, it's also the flip side of that is the Achilles heel or the Kryptonite. Every superpower has a super weakness associated with it in the right context. And so the challenges in life usually come to dealing with whatever is our core wiring and whatever is our core purpose. And so working that out becomes very interesting story, because there are bits of that truth that will apply to other people, and then bits of it that people won't be able to identify with. And this kind of brings us to the idea of destiny, that I've been toying with this over the last several years. The idea that people are created with unique opportunities, and that destiny is not necessarily about being in a place to do a specific action. It's more about becoming the person that is fully actualizing whatever it is that you're exceptional at. And it's really becoming everything that you can be. And it goes back to Maslow's idea of self-actualization, that there's something that is essentially you, that is very unique to you, and that if you are walking in destiny, you're basically just uncovering that and actualizing that in your life. And then really contending with this idea that you have some central threat in your life, and that makes for a great story, because people want to hear a story that has some drama in it. And most of our life stories have a fair amount of drama, and it usually is related to what we can actually control in our lives, and kind of grappling with that whole thing. So what's your drama?
Okay. And I want to give someone else a chance to talk.
Okay, I'll go. And it's like,
I'll go after Teresa.
okay. All right. And Rick, I love what you're talking. I feel like some connections, because, well, for a lot of reasons, but like given my background, find myself a grown-ass woman, sorry about using that word, who struggles to say no, and I like the disease to please. And got right before this meeting, a woman dropped off all this food that I said, no, I don't want, no. I said it like 3 times, and then I'm holding the bag, like, so it's problematic. Yeah, it's like I don't it's like I'm not driving my own cars, okay. Thank you for listening. I'm letting someone else take over now. Here you go.
Anybody else want to throw in something?
Yeah, Mark, I can throw in my own drama. I was kind of thrown into a personal crisis when I started learning about the illusion and the false stories that we've been fed all of our lives through history and through politics and through our education. And then I started reading deeper into research done by authors like David Corton and Riane Eisler and others who are telling the truth about our history. And I think that's going to be a big part of what comes out of the Black Lives Matter and this current crisis about police reform is a direct confrontation with the false stories we've been telling ourselves as a society about our history.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I'm teaching this course at the Osher Institute. It's about really reforming everything all at once. It's kind of a big thing to encompass, but we need to reform not just the historical stories that we tell ourselves about racism, about slavery, about the repression of women, but also about how the 1% have dominated our economies in Europe and in America ever since we started. And there's a lot of honesty that needs to be taught in our schools about the way those corporations influence the political development of our countries.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why I'm teaching this. But even deeper than that is the gender relationships in history. If you read Riane Eisler's The Chalice and the Blade, I cannot emphasize this book enough, The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler. That's what made me a feminist, and that's what proved to me the fact that ever since our civilizations and our history started to be shaped by whatever empire was governing, which meant that history was written by what males won what wars when, governed our history. And that's a total, warped vision of the way that human beings should evolve, because it totally left out women. And so I think in the 21st century now, we're finally seeing that women are entering into the historical discussion in a big way, which is very much needed and very much can be helpful in saving our society to not only to reform our perception of gender relationships in society, but also our relationship to the earth. A big part of the way that the earth has been treated in the name of economic progress deals with the way that women have been treated in history. And I hope that this group going forward, which I'm very much encouraged by this first few minutes that we're meeting, will encourage that discussion. So I'll leave it there.
Rick, I have a question for you. I think, just in what you're talking about, who gets to write history and that kind of thing. It's always who controls media, who controls communication channels. That's has told the story they want it, the way they want it told. Right now, we're in the midst of the revolution of the internet, where now anyone can publish, anyone can blog, anyone can say anything, and we're kind of there's a lot missing about how to use it. But I would think the dream, of course, is that kind of democratization of communication would help us to hear so many more voices, not just those who are in power or those who have control, but then it does put the burden on the rest of us who aren't the powerful to tell our stories well. And I think that goes back to Mark's whole point is, if we feel like we have something to say, let's figure out how to do that well and realize we do have something to say. So
I'm going to jump
Yeah.
in real quick too, because, you know, I described like a central problem being this kind of female-ish one, but I have 3 brothers who are pretty awesome. I'm the only girl, and then I have a son. So, you know, like I feel like defending my brothers too, and I think that I'd like to suggest that this isn't necessarily a male female. It's not like men are all like, they're good guys. My son is such a good guy. He's a history major, and he really woke me up. Didn't know how much I used to I worked so much. I didn't know The View wasn't a reliable source for my news, you know, the corporate so anyway, I think there's like a class war, like we're really mean to poor people. And that may be I want to just defend my brothers is what I'm saying. Okay, I'm passing on the mic.
Thank you. So I wanted to, before we leave this idea of story, I really wanted to just touch on what we leave behind and kind of how that affects how we want to tell our story. I'd like to suggest that studies have shown that 5 out of every 5 people ends up dying. And so your odds are pretty good that you're going to die at some point. And so the question remains, what do you leave behind? You know, I've watched a lot of people go through life, and there are some people that wherever they go, chaos follows. And, you know, they just leave this mess in their wake, that when they come into a situation, people, all of a sudden, relationships are broken and people are angry and frustrated and all that. And then there are other people that you definitely want them on your team, because if you get them on your team, things are just going to get smoother. They're going to end up with people getting along, and they're going to be able to calm down, you know, the stress level and all that kind of stuff. And so the question about how we live our lives really is, what kind of an impact do we want to leave on people? And at the end of our life, who will care that we lived? And I think this is a really important question to grapple with. And I think this should be central in our story, because this is tied in with how we see our role in the larger context that we are in organizations and families and, you know, all that stuff that we touch. We have an impact on everyone that we interact with. There's a ripple effect. And I think that when we tell our story, that's something that we want to weave into that, is what kind of an impact, what kind of a lasting impression do we want to have on all of our relationships. And it really comes down to just how we'll be remembered. And I think there's always opportunity to change. There's always opportunity to grow. There's always opportunity to address issues and to really live our life like it matters. And in this story, as we were writing this story down, I think there's different frameworks that we can use to tell our story. One is around life stages. Another one is around the different dimensions of our life, and then the emotional journey. In life stages, we should be learning something really important out of every stage that we go through. And so if we're 20-something and telling our life story, there's not going to be much of a story there, because we're learning that you know, we're trying to make our way in the world and all that. But if you're 60-something and telling your story, then you should be able to tell multiple stories at each, based on the viewpoint that you gained at each life stage, because all of these life stages offer fundamentally different truths. And as we grow, hopefully we're kind of accumulating knowledge and wisdom. So a completely different framework for telling your story is around the work that you've done, the experiences that you've had, the people that you've met, how you've grown personally, and fun, adventurous things that you've done. So this is another grid, which is around how you spent your time and energy. And so as you're organizing your life story and saying, what did it all mean? This is a grid that you can use to kind of organize your life. In fact, you could tell 4 different stories about your life from each of those viewpoints and have something interesting, and then combine those together and mesh the key learnings and overlap between growth and work and all that kind of stuff. So that's again a conceptual grid for telling your story. And then the third grid that I want to suggest is describing your emotional journey. We all have stuff that we lay awake at night thinking about. And at this point, I want to just highlight that your brain is biologically responsive to those 5 core emotions. Notice that only one of those is good. And so we're biologically disposed to be unhappy. And so, coming to grips with what really torques you off and what really makes you sad and what makes you feel ashamed, that's a really interesting story. And especially if you get some insight into how to overcome the impact of being controlled by emotions and feelings and all that. So anyway, that's just kind of an overall picture of when we go through life, what we experience and what we leave behind us.
Mark, can I ask for a clarification? And actually, could I ask everyone to quiet down the chat? There's kind of a tangential chat, and I'm sorry I didn't ask to silence it earlier, but you had the life stages thing. Were you thinking of that as like a target audience thing, or like what I learned in my youth, what I learned in my young adult?
Yeah, I'm thinking that you learn very different things at each of those stages. And so you could tell a story from a youthful perspective, and it's a valid story, but hopefully as you go through the stages, you can talk about different.
But isn't what you learn as a senior kind of supersede what you learned as a youth? Because, you already knew it, what you learned as a youth by that point, right?
So one of the things that you'll see as you go through these stages, as a youth, you're absolutely center of your world, right? That child, everything revolves around them. As a young adult, you start having to do that interaction a lot more with others. Mm-hmm. Usually by midlife, you're now taking a kind of an outside perspective, and you're seeing a lot more of how your interactions with others affect others. You're taking on responsibilities a lot of times for others, whether it's for youth or whether it's for people who are working for you. And by the time you kind of get to be a senior, you're really looking at how has my life affected other people? I've got, potentially children and grandchildren, and a lot more of your perspective is from a kind of outside of yourself and looking at the world as a whole. So those life stages, I think, are kind of just a shift in perspective, and your learning goes with that. Mm-hmm. Your interactions go with that. Your relationships go with that. Everything kind of goes with that.
But often at each life stage, you draw completely different conclusions. Yeah. So if I read my story at 20 and my story at 40 and my story at 60, I would say, my truth at those different levels is so different. It's hopefully there are elements that survive, but you know what I'm concerned about and how I think the world works and how resilient other people are and how much I can force my will on other people. Those things are fundamentally different at each life stage.
So the context has changed so much that the takeaway lessons are
So
sort
the
of
takeaways are
applicable.
completely different, I think.
Yeah, okay, that makes
I was going to ask if that was the homework assignment.
sense.
What's that?
Is that the homework assignment? Write a summary of your life story at each of the stages?
Yeah.
Some
It
of you
could be.
aren't far along, but
All right, and I'm going to wrap up. This is the last section now. I just want to talk about where you go from here, and here's where I'm going to give the homework.
Okay.
First thing I'd like to propose is that you separate the idea of publishing from the idea of writing. What I'm talking about here is writing for insight. And until you have written a life story that you want to pass on, then it's going to be tainted by your idea of publishing, because you will edit what you write based on so-and-so and how they will react to what you write. And so you'll be heavily editing yourself, and you won't be even honest with yourself if you think that you're going to have to disclose this to other people. And so my advice, and I've been thinking about this for years, my advice is write for yourself and be brutally honest, including with all your shortcomings and everything. And then sometime later, you can choose what to disclose to other people. But when you're writing, just put it all down. Just put it all, the good, bad, the ugly. Just get it all out there. And then you can figure out how much you want to pass on. Then the next thing is, I want to propose that there's an easy way to write that could be helpful to you. This is how I write, at least. Is I find that I work from the bottom up when I'm writing something new, because if I work from the top down, the top structure that I think I'm going to describe is always wrong. And it takes a long time for that to emerge. And so, but if I write from the bottom up, it really comes down to selecting one important topic that I want to describe, and then to write myself an outline with maybe 4 main headings and 4 sub-bullets in that, and then to convert that into prose. And so what you end up with, if you do that kind of a process, you end up with about 1 page that talks about some important subject that you feel strong about. And then you can use that to dialogue with other people, and you're not trying to fit it into this gigantic work. What you're really doing is you're saying, here's an element of truth that I've thought about, and now you can write in a much smaller a smaller deliverable, let's say. And then if you just repeat that process, if you've done that 100 times, you have a book. And what I found when I wrote a book on software engineering, what I found is that I tried to write top down, and it totally didn't work. And it wasn't until I started writing bottom up that I even discovered what the ultimate structure had to be. And the structure revealed itself instead of was imposed on the thing. And I think even for writing an autobiography or things about your life, this would be a good process to use, because the structure will reveal itself once you understand all of the things that you're concerned about. Now there's an overarching theme that will emerge. And then here are 4 ideas that you could use to just kind of bootstrap this whole process for yourself. One amazing thing is people that have shaped your life. And so, Rick, it sounds like you're a really avid reader. I am too. I've probably read close to 1,000 books now. And I pretty much read everything that comes out in certain genres. And so
That's a lot.
a lot of the people that have shaped my life have actually been authors that wrote great books. And other people could describe experiences that have shaped your life, or ideas that made you who you are. And then there's always the old go-to that you can describe pain in your life and how you overcame pain. And maybe I would say if you're really serious about writing your story, why don't you try to write all 4 of those stories and then look for the commonality, because each of those give you a different perspective that that informs who you are. And then this is just a reiteration of the small idea. Start small, don't start big. Because if you start big, you're only focused on the end goal, and the end goal will meet itself as long as you're enjoying the process of writing small pieces. And so my advice is start at the bottom and just write about one thing that you care about, and then just keep doing that until you don't care about anything that you haven't written on. You guys are muted.
Your
Great
last point-
suggestions, Mark.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Can you go back one?
Great suggestions. I'll be working on it for our next meeting. And I just want to ask you when our next meeting is going to be.
I'm open to suggestions. I'm thinking about doing a talk on thriving during chaos.
But how long till the next meeting?
And I was thinking about at the end of the month. I was kind of waiting to see how this meeting went to see if I want to do it.
The end of the month is Tuesday.
And now I'm really inclined to do it because this was fun.
Yeah, but good idea to skip the holiday weekend.
Oh, yeah.
So the reason I asked you to go back one slide, that last point, let your story shape your decision about the life you lead. It made me think of the book, it's a
Million miles in 1,000 years.
Yeah, 1,000,000 miles in 1,000 years. And it was such an interesting book because it talked a lot about how the stories we tell about our lives shape the life we lead. And some of the examples he talked about were really powerful in for instance, helping children, write their story. And, what is the story of our family? What is our family like? What are the kinds of things we want to do, what we want to be known for? And so it was a really fascinating book. I'd encourage you, everybody else, to read it. But it's an interesting thing. One of the things that comes to mind about that is, in psychology and counseling, they talk about reframing. And sometimes people can feel like reframing somehow is dishonest, like how we perceived certain events is the truth, and they're trying to talk us into, being more positive about it or whatever. But it really is true that much of how we tell our story really influences the life we lead. Anyway, so yeah, I would highly encourage everybody to read that book.
I'll piggyback off of that, Stacy, if that's okay. And because we don't want to be like, if something really hideous happened, we don't want to like look at it through rose-colored glasses, because that will nauseate everybody. it'll just be phony. But what you're saying so right. And then just what made things interesting for me was maybe looking at, like, there's the lens of through my eyes as a 8-year-old girl or something, but then taking that same lens and looking really deep, like putting it into the other players, I mean, and then it's like, wow, there's really, the more you do that, there's not really a monster in a way. But I don't want to fall into the self-pleasing trap of justifying shitty behavior. And I apologize, I swore twice tonight. I'll try not to do that. And my last thing will be that I'm so honored. I mean, you guys seem so uber talented and cool, and I feel humbled, but I'm gonna hang in anyway. I don't care if I don't feel like I'm up on, if I'm not as accomplished, but I don't care. I'm hanging. I'm gonna stay.
Don't compare yourself to other people, Teresa.
Amen. Whoever said that. I won't. I'm not
so,
Diana.
yeah, I am so excited about this group. I just think it's just been so wonderful to get together and visit, and everybody has contributed so much. I really appreciate the interactions. So Eric Williams, do you have anything that you wanted to share?
I don't think so, Mark. I really enjoyed this. I liked the way you framed it. And as I said in the comments, I think these were a lot of things I kind of knew, but to put it in the context of a story is really interesting to me. And I'd like to go back through your slides later and just think about each one of them more. Will you be posting them?
Yeah, they're posted on my website, and I'm gonna send the link to, I'm gonna send the link and the link to the video, so that we'll basically be able to capture the whole presentation and watch it, or for other people that didn't make it. And I'll send that out to the whole Meetup group.
Great.
Anybody else want to talk about any other things before we break off?
Mark, this is Diana. I just wanted to tell you how interesting this was, because I've often joked that I need to write a book about my life because nobody would believe it. And I even had that suggestion given to me by my stepmom, you really should write a book. So this was very good to have all this information on how to kind of break it up. Good. Because quite often I felt overwhelmed.
Good, yeah. Well, and it's not the destination that's important. As a writer, I found that it's the journey that is the important part, and the destination just happens when you get far enough along the journey. But it's the act of writing that is important, not the publishing. And I find separating those two is really valuable, because it takes the pressure off. There is no such thing as a writer's block, because you don't have to write anything. You don't have to feel pressure it's not like you're getting paid. And there's very few authors in the whole world that get money for what they do. So you write for love, and you write because you have to write, not because you think you're going to get rich.
Yeah, I wanted to say I thank you, Mark, for the Meetup group, and I look forward to the writing assignment and to the next meeting.
Gosh, I really thought I was going to get rich here.
Sorry to break
Funny, Teresa, funny.
No problem.
All right, well, I guess we'll end the meeting, and hopefully we'll see you next month.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Use the discussion group to, if you want to post stuff or ask questions or answer questions, and because that gives us a way to communicate in between meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
That's such an amazing coincidence with Lori.
Yeah. Bye.
See ya.